One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I don't know how many of you listen to my daily podcast, The Potty Report, but I have been very openly passionate about podcast ads, like talking about the different ways I want to experiment with them this year, the different things that I'm learning, and how I'm seeing my audience respond to podcast ads in general ever since I started using them in different ways. But I had a fantastic question that was posed to me recently by a member of our community. So shout out to Elder. He is in our free Profit Podcast online community Facebook group, and he is always so active on our Facebook Lives. So shout out Elder. This is for you. You had the question, do we have templates for how podcast ads are supposed to work or what we're supposed to say? So this episode today was inspired by Elder's question, and I have so many thoughts and just so many fun things to share with you today. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Krystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, so I already told y'all all about Elder, and I'm so grateful that he had this question, because there are some things in my business and in my podcast that just kind of happen naturally for me. And people ask me questions, well, how did you come up with that? How did you start doing this? And I'm like, oh, I guess I do have a process, or I have things that are going on in this crazy head of mine that not everybody thinks this way. And so I'm so glad that he asked this question, because podcast ads, like just being totally frank, really upfront and honest, are a trial and error. They really are. And the reason why I say that is because I have been listening to podcasts. Geez, let me see. I first started listening to podcasts probably in 2014, 2015, somewhere around then. Maybe earlier than that. But I wasn't a huge podcast listener whenever they first came out. It wasn't until I got an iPhone and then I started listening on there. Like I wasn't one of the early adopters of, I'm going to download podcasts to my iPod and make it like all those. No, I'm not. I wish I could say I was an OG that did that back in the day, but that's not how things worked around here. Actually, in 2015, I would have been pregnant like that whole year. And I remember always listening to podcasts whenever I would take my other son, my middle son, on walks. We had a jogging stroller. This was back in the era of being new to staying at home and trying to be outside, trying to occupy, my then 3-year-old son and, just be outside, be active. And I would listen to music sometimes, but then I would listen to podcasts as well. And I remember thinking, this is a really great ad, or this was so dumb. Why is this ad on this podcast? So if you don't know this about me, I have a marketing degree. And I know usually it doesn't apply to a lot of the things that I do, but it really explains why I am so obsessed with understanding people's strategy and the tactics that they use, because I was taught to pay attention to these things. So when we're on a family road trip and my husband, I will point out so many billboards that I'm like, oh my gosh, if they just did this one thing, then I bet their business would be so much better. Or if they could just change this picture and do all these, rearrange it, it is something I cannot turn it off, y'all. I cannot turn off my marketing brain. It is always there, always working in the background. And so I have paid attention to what other podcasts are doing. Whether these are big name podcasts that we listen to that are in the top 10 of all podcasts in the world, or podcasts that are run by everyday people, I pay attention. And with everything that's coming on the scene, like dynamic content in Buzzsprout, this allows you to add your own podcast ads to your show, whether it's at the beginning, which is pre-roll, or at the end, which is post-roll. You can take advantage of these features. So I know y'all are like, well, what do I say? What am I supposed to say in these ad sections of my podcast? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you want to know more about what I just talked about, if you're like, dynamic, what is that? I'm going to link in the show notes to some really good pieces of content, podcast episodes, and YouTube videos we've done about dynamic content and how podcast ads actually work. So go to krystalprofit.com/episode 229 for all the resources that we mentioned today. Okay. So let's go back to Elder's question. Do you have templates for these ads? And this immediately inspired me. It really did, because I wanted to give you several options for how you can mention your products, your services, your courses, your books, your events, whatever you have to offer your audience. I wanted to make sure that you have lots of choices, because like I said, this is a trial and error strategy, if you want to call it that, because you can't just create one podcast ad and intend to use it for all of 2021, right? Or all of till kingdom come with your podcast, because I don't think that's a good strategy. I think that you need to have more kind of in your creative backlog of, this is what we can do. This is what we want to try this month. And I also want to let you know, don't feel the pressure that you have to change this all the time. Okay. I'm going to link to, I did a recent interview with the guys from Buzzsprout. We talked about dynamic content and different ways that you can do it. And I asked them, it's I've had people ask me, should I change dynamic content every day? How often should it be changed? And Kevin, he's one of the co-founders. He was like, no, that's not why it was created. That was not the intention behind it. It was more so to be able to add time-sensitive promotions or different ways to connect with your audience, but it wasn't meant to be changed all the time. Okay. So I hope that this you relax that tension in your shoulders a little bit and you're like, okay, I don't have to update this and change my ads every time I put out a new episode. But I am going to encourage you to try different types of podcast ads, different language, different ways that you approach promoting your products, your services, everything on your show, and then double down on what really works, what's getting you those results. Okay, so I actually developed a fantastic PDF guide that I want you to check out. Okay, so again, this is going to be in the show notes. So krystalprofit.com/episode 229. This is going to be podcast ad templates and calls to action. So this is going to look really familiar if you've previously grabbed my calls to action PDF, because what we've done is we've kind of just beefed up that previous PDF that we had. It was 25 calls to action that you can make on your podcast. Well, now we've added podcast ad templates and calls to action for your podcast, because I think that they're one and the same and they can be used interchangeably, right? You don't just have to have a call to action that's making you money. You can have people, do an ad for people to join your Facebook group or to sign up for a free training. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that's monetarily making you money like right now at this moment, but I just want to let y'all know that it will be in the show notes. So again, krystalprofit.com/episode 229. You want to grab it. You want to grab it because this is the best place to start. Okay, so we're going to get right into it. So first, I want to give you a brief overview of my ad style and what that means. Like, I'm saying ad style in quotes because I totally just made this up, but I did come up with 3 different ways to figure out your ad style. Okay, so the first is the minimalist. Okay, and this is like in every way that you can use this word. It is literally, you go here, you get this, this is what you get. Boom. Like, there's no inflating the message. There's no story behind it. It is just cut and dry. This is what it is. This is where you can get it. Boom, go. Like, it's probably an ad that I could deliver in less than 10 seconds. Okay. I'm not saying that this is the best way to go, but I'm saying that this is an option for those of you that are like, I don't really know. I'm a little like, I don't know how to beef it up. Then start here. Start with the minimalist ad style. Okay. And then the second one is tell me more. And we're going to dive into a little bit more about what this means, but it's where you're leaving someone like, oh, I want to know more about that. Where can I find that? Where can I go get it? You want them asking these questions before you actually tell them where to go and where to get it and what the benefit is. You want someone saying to themselves, ooh, tell me more. That sounds interesting. Okay, so that's the second type of ad style. The first one is minimalist. The second one is tell me more. The third one is, will this ever end? No, this one's like, it kind of has a negative context to it, but I have to tell you, I've listened to so many podcasts and I will hear an ad that someone inserted in the middle of a show and I am just like, oh my gosh, will this ever end? Like, they are just going on and on. They're telling these stories and it's a product I don't even care about. This is a bigger name podcast. Okay, they're not selling their own personal things. It's like they have a sponsorship for something I have zero interest in. And I'm fast forwarding through all the ads. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hit the fast forward button like 10 times and they're still talking about this product. I don't care. Will this ever end? Okay, so these are the 3 different types of ad styles. And if you can't tell from this, I'm hoping that you don't fall into the category of will this ever end. You really want to stick somewhere between the minimalist and tell me more ad style because you're going to have a better bang for your buck. And tell me more is usually where I would love for you to end up with your podcast ads, but most people start in the minimalist area simply because they just don't know how to beef up their ads. They don't know how to add that element of story or telling a testimonial or something else in there, which that's fine. We'll get there. Okay. Don't worry. Stick with me. This is where like my marketing nerd genius comes in and swoops in and gives you all the great details. But for today, I just want you to decide, where are you going to start? where are you going to start with your ad style? So again, go download the podcast ads template. You'll have all the information there. But the minimalist ads are really straight to the point. Okay, so let's go back and do a little bit more of a deep dive on those, because that is what it is, who it's for, and where to find it. Okay, like it is, like we talked about, it is black and white. There's no gray area. It is, this is what it is. This is who it's for. This is where you can find it. Boom, done. 15 seconds. I could do one of those. The next one is tell me more. These are longer in nature, but these are still so powerful. These can include a personal story or an example of maybe a testimonial from your students, or maybe it's one of those that you just have people sitting on the edge of their seats. Maybe you tell them, let's say it was something that you wanted to give away, even a little bit of whatever it is that you're trying to sell. Maybe you're trying to encourage them, hey, if you go to this link by this date, you will get a free whatever it is, or you'll get a discount, or here's the discount code, but you have to go here before this time. Those are the tell me mores that I've actually taken action on, right? So I'm not just telling you this as like, oh, this is marketing theory. I'm sharing with you the ways that I have taken action as a podcast listener. Like when people say these things, it's when I pay attention. It's when I actually go to the website or follow up, go to their website or go to their social media account, wherever they're telling me and the call to action to go. Those are the ones that I usually take action on. Okay. And then will this ever end? Like I said, let's try to steer clear of these, because if you have recorded an ad and it is way too long, like you're looking at it and you're like, oh my gosh, it's 7 minutes. That's too long. It's too long. There's a reason why the dynamic content, there's a limitation on how much you can add in the pre-roll and the post-roll, and it's up to 5 minutes. Okay, it's up to 5 minutes. Think about that. If you're talking for 5 minutes about one thing, like it better be freaking compelling, okay? Like that is so long to be talking about something that doesn't have a good story to it, or it doesn't have any great examples, or you're just like talk. You're probably being narcissistic in that too. This is just an assumption, but I'm just saying I've heard them. I've heard all the ads where it's just like, why is this about you? Like we're listening to this as your podcast listener. Why is this ad just all about you and how incredible you are? Shouldn't it be about how you're helping us or how you could help us potentially if we become your customers? Y'all, this is me. I'm being judgy, okay? I'm being judgy about other people's podcast ads, okay? Maybe you shouldn't do that, right? We shouldn't be judgmental, but come on. You know who you are. If your ads are way too long, they don't make any sense, they're not for your audience, and they're not performing well for you, this is why. I'm just telling you, this is why. Here's how you can fix it. But it's where a host just rambles on and on about the topic, and they just forget, like, why are we here? Why are we listening to this show? Okay, so that's just, we're just going to let that go. We're going to let this, will this ever end? These are bad examples. Don't follow these examples, but they're in the PDF so you know what to avoid. Okay, so now let's talk about what to say for these specific ads. And then I want you to download this podcast ads template again so you can start practicing and implementing these on your show. Okay, so I've broken up the template to show you which types of ads to put where, which ones will perform better in the pre-roll, the mid-roll, and the post-roll. Again, if you aren't familiar with these terms and how they work, go listen to the episodes that we've linked to in the show notes, krystalprofit.com/episode 229, because we've talked about these. So the best ads for the pre-roll are really the time-sensitive promotions or your priority goals and calls to action. Okay, so if you want to grow your Facebook group, maybe in the pre-roll, you can say, hey guys, just want to let y'all know we are doing some incredible things in our Profit Podcast online community. We are sharing stories about podcasters. We share helpful tips every weekday, and we have been offering some podcast audits that are totally free for people being members of our community. You can learn more by going to krystalprofit.com/podcast community to join us there. Okay, that wasn't really a time sensitive one, but it's one about sharing my Facebook group. That's exactly what you could say verbatim, and you can put it in the very beginning of your show. The only other thing that I would add is think about the transition between segments. Okay, so if someone is listening to the pre-roll of your podcast, then I like it when people add, before we get into today's episode, I wanted to share with you a little bit about, and then you would add your call to action or whatever you're adding. And then at the very end, you can say, okay, let's get into today's episode. You'll hear this a lot in my pre-roll ads or even in the mid-roll. I'll say, sorry, I had to interrupt, but I have something really important to tell you about. And then I'll get into what we're talking about for that ad. And then at the end, I'll say, okay, let's get back to today's episode. So you want to have a transition that feels natural and normal. But if you're like,
being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants. Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
I don't really know what to say, then I would recommend adding music in between your transitions. So I love the Office Ladies podcast. I've talked about this so many times. It's my favorite podcast I look forward to every single week. And what they have done, and they've done this since the very beginning. Y'all, I've been listening to this show since before it aired, right? Like when the initial trailer came out, I about lost my mind. Okay, it came out in September of 2019. I cannot believe it's been that long. But I remember I did a case study on this. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. If you want to nerd out with me on podcasting and the Office Ladies podcast, you are more than welcome to. I did a whole podcast episode about it, and it remains in the top 5 most downloaded episodes of this podcast. But what I did is I really watched how they slowly added in sponsored content along the way. Like they didn't start, which I've seen lots of podcasts this past 12 months start, and they already have sponsored content, and there's not really a great transition. They figure it out a few months in, but what I love that they did was from the very beginning, they would say, hey, let's take a quick break. And then they would play this music, and then they would come back. So there wasn't even actually sponsored content there. They would just say, okay, we're going to take a quick break real fast, and then we'll be back. Granted, their episodes are close to an hour long, or if not longer. So it makes sense that they have these breaks in between because there's 2 people talking. Maybe somebody's got to go to the bathroom. Maybe somebody needs a snack. I don't know. But they had these natural breaks in the content from day one. Day one. They didn't have any sponsors. I want to say in the first few episodes, if they did, it was one ad. It was really short. Now they have probably 4 to 6 ads in every episode, but you're mentally prepared for it because they have you conditioned. It's almost like Pavlov's dog, right? Like they have that music that plays in between their segments, and you're just like, oh, an ad is coming. Sometimes I listen to them, sometimes I don't. These are big corporate sponsors. It's like BetterHelp. Is it BetterHelp or Better Health? I always forget. It's the one where you can, it's like a mental health service for counseling. That's one that's on there a lot. Of course, there's Indeed.com or ZipRecruiter, things like that. And then they have these smaller companies that they're trying to support that they really like as consumers that they'll have ad spots for. But most of the time, depending on my mood too, I'll just fast forward through them because I know that it's usually sponsored content. But if I were listening to someone else's podcast that I regularly listen to that's a lot smaller, but it's a very niche, it's a very specific one that I'm actually interested in purchasing their programs, their services, I listen to their ads. maybe this is just a dorky thing that I do. I'm obsessed with podcast ads and understanding how people do it. Maybe you're like, oh no, Krystal, I fast forward through all ads I ever hear. But I think that you have to take this into consideration as a consumer of shows as well. What can you do to have your people saying, tell me more, not let me fast forward through this? Maybe that's what we should call the third one. Instead of will this ever end, we're going to call it / let me fast forward through this, because that's really how I feel about a lot of podcast ads that have nothing to do with what I'm trying to accomplish, either in my professional or even in my personal life. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today, because I got excited that we get to talk about podcast ads here on this podcast, because I know that this is a mystery to most people, especially if you're just getting started and you're like, Krystal, this episode was way over my head. I don't even want to start thinking about podcast ads. Well, hang on. Let's go back to what we just talked about with the office ladies, right? They conditioned their audience from the very beginning. So whenever they actually started adding in sponsored content, I bet they didn't lose a bunch of listeners, because people were already in love with what they were producing, but also they knew how to transition between segments. So it's not even that big of a deal now that they have ads. People will tell me this all the time. I'm afraid I'm going to lose listeners if I add in podcast ads to my show. I'm terrified that they're just going to drop like flies. And this is why I encourage all podcasters, listen to me now. If you've been doing something else, come back, because this is super, super important. You want to have calls to action in every single episode, which is why we beefed up the podcast ads template to include podcast ads and calls to action. Because if you don't have anything to offer your audience right now, that's okay, but you need to get used to asking them to do something now. Even if you're just getting started, you need to ask your people to do something. So when you do have something to offer to them, maybe you're going to publish a book one day. Maybe you're going to have a live event. Maybe you're going to have a virtual event. Maybe you're going to have a program, a course, a membership, whatever it is, you want to ask your people to do something now. So in the future, when you ask them to take a bigger step, right? Maybe it's a financial investment to join you on the journey. You don't want them to say, that's weird. Why did Krystal all of a sudden ask us to do stuff? She usually just delivers fantastic content and she never asks us to do anything, so I'm probably not going to do that. No, you want people getting these baby micro commitments from you along the journey. That way, when you ask them to do something that's a lot bigger, it's that next step, they're more likely to do it. They're more likely to do it without saying, no, thanks, that's not for me. So that's like my other marketing tip of the day is have your people commit to you in small ways. That way, when you ask those bigger asks, I can't even say that, asks, ASKS is what I'm saying, okay? When you make those bigger asks, that's really hard to say, y'all. I don't know why, but they're more likely to do it. They're more likely to make it happen. Okay, so I was going to give you real fast. So if you want to grow a Facebook group, put that in the pre-roll. A great mid-roll ad is the tell me more ones. It really is. So the minimalist one, the one that you're just like boom, 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 put that at the beginning. I think that those perform really well. Either ones, did tell me more or minimalist perform super well. And then the post roll, I always tell people if you have nothing else to say at the end, but you want to add something that takes the next step in the journey, just say, we would love for you to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Share this, take a screenshot wherever you're listening, share it on social media, and we would love to know what your number one takeaway was from this episode. But y'all, that's all I have for you today. I hope that you found this super helpful. Again, go to krystalprofit.com/episode 229 to grab the podcast ad templates that we talked about here today. I think that you're going to find it very helpful, and there's going to be some scripts and calls to action and all kinds of things there that can help you get better at podcast ads. I really am so passionate about this because it was such a big mystery to me for a long time until I sat down and said, wait, I've listened to podcasts long enough. I know how all this works. I know which ones I prefer to listen to. And I have just taken those formulas and created something that's my own. And I want to share that with you. So make sure you go download this podcast ads template. Go to krystalprofit.com/episode 229 to grab it today. But that's all I have for you. If this is your first time tuning in, make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this. Again, take a screenshot and share it on social media. Tag me on Instagram and say, Krystal, this was fantastic. Or I grabbed my podcast ad template. Now I'm going to go start creating my podcast ads, or whatever you want to say. I want to hear from you. So please reach out. If you haven't already, join us in our free Facebook community. We're going to have a link in the show notes. But as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Krystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Krystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.